Hey everyone, welcome back to Crime Family. I'm your co-host AJ, and I'm here with my two sisters and co-hosts Stephanie and Katie. And for this week's episode, we are going to be talking about the Idaho Murders case, which we talked about before on the podcast a few seasons ago when it was a news story and it was developing. But we have actually quite a bit of updates for you since we last talked about it. So I'll kind of give a quick rundown of the case in case you need a little bit of a refresher, but we're not going to focus on the full details of the case. We're just going to go into more of the updates, but I just wanted to kind of give an overview for you. And just for reference, so the trial in this case is upcoming still. It's scheduled for August 11th of this year. So these are developments that have been coming out in leading up to the trial. Obviously, not everything's come out because some things will come out at trial, but we're just going to kind of go over the big developments that have happened in the last few months for sure. So if you remember this case, this happened back in November of 2022, and it was in the small college town of Moscow, Idaho. And it was when 4 college students, Madison Mogan, Kaylee Gonzalez, Zaina Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, were brutally murdered in their off-campus home. And this was a story that we first talked about when it was really fresh and before they had caught the suspect. And then after they caught the suspect, we did another update episode. So Bryan Kohberger is currently the one charged with the murder of these 4 students, and he is currently awaiting trial in Idaho for these murders. And he was actually arrested just at the end of 2022. I think it was late December. So about, 6 weeks or so after the murders had happened. And so there was kind of it was huge in the online sleuth world. People were constantly talking about this case. People were constantly looking at the different clues there were, the surveillance footage, and everyone really wanted to find out who this person was that brutally murdered these 4 college students. And then in December 2022, it was Bryan Kohberger. And since that time, so it's been just over 2 years, they have been waiting. We've been waiting for the trial, and things have been coming out slowly. A little bit about what the defense's argument is going to be, kind of the angles they're looking at, and also some new evidence that is coming out. So the first thing that I wanted to cover is the newly released 911 call. So if you remember, there was 6 roommates in total in this house, and 4 of them were murdered by the alleged suspect, and there were 2 surviving roommates who were the ones that ended up calling 911 in the morning after the murders. I think it was something like 7 or 8 hours after they believe the murders happened, which they believe is about in the around 4 a.m. or between 4 and 4:30 a.m. That morning in November. So they actually just recently released the full 911 audio tape of the roommates calling 911 for the first time. And this was all sort of details that we had only heard about. We had never actually heard any audio from that tape. So they actually released it in full. So I'm going to share that audio with you. If you're watching the full, if you're watching the video version of this, you will see the screen share that I'm about to do with a little bit of the video, but it's really just more of a transcript on the screen. But I'm going to play it, and you will hear the audio if you're just listening to the audio version. So it's about just under 5 minutes long. So I'm going to play the full 5 minutes, and then we'll talk about it.
911 location of your emergency.
Something is happening. Something happened in our house. We don't know what.
What is the address of the emergency?
1122.
What is the rest of the address?
Oh, Kings Road.
Okay. And is that a house or an apartment?
It's a house.
Can you repeat the address to make sure that I have it right?
I'll talk to you guys. We live at the White, so we're next to them.
I need someone to repeat the address for verification.
The address, 1122 King Road.
And what's the phone number that you're calling from?
What's your phone number?
And tell me exactly what's going on.
One of the roommates has passed out, and she was drunk last night, and she not wake me up.
Okay.
Oh, and they saw some man in their house last night. Yeah. Hi,
And are you with the patient? Okay, I need someone to keep the phone, stop passing it around.
Can I just tell you what happened pretty much?
What is going on currently? Is someone passed out right now?
I don't really know, but pretty much at 4 a.m.
Okay, I need to know what's going on right now if someone is passed out. Can you find that out?
Yeah, I'll come. Come on, but we gotta go check. But we have to. Is he passed out? What's wrong? He's not waking up.
Okay, one moment. I'm getting help started that way.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and how old is she?
She's 20.
20, you said?
Yes, 20. Here's one.
Okay.
Hello? Hello?
Okay, I need someone to stop passing the phone around because I've talked to 4 different people.
Okay, sorry, they just gave me the phone.
Is she breathing?
Hello?
Is she breathing?
No.
Okay.
You need to talk to them, okay? I can't talk to them. They need you to talk to them.
Hello.
Okay. I've already sent the ambulance and law enforcement. Stay on the line. If there is a defibrillator available, send someone to get it now and tell me when you have it.
Say that again. There's a police here right now.
Okay. If there's a defibrillator available, send someone to get it now and tell me when you have it.
We don't have one. I can see it. Do you have a defibrillator? Yes, we have one.
Are you talking to the officer?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to let you go since he's there with you and can help you.
What do you guys think of that audio? I mean, we didn't really learn necessarily anything new from it, but it's kind of something that people have wanted to hear because there was a lot of uncertainties around the circumstances of like when the call was placed or what happened during the call. So now we kind of have a little bit more of that information.
Okay. First, I always it always surprises me how like disinterested the 911 operators always feel. And it's just like, it sounds like they're like annoyed to even be there, but I feel like that's just part of their training, like not to panic and just like get to the point kind of thing. But they're always just like, okay, what's going on? What's the address? I'm just like, oh my God, I guess I wouldn't be a good 911 operator because I'd be like panicking the entire time as well. And also they think she's like passed out from drinking, because we know from before that they were like attacked and stabbed. Is there not blood everywhere? Like, do they not see that? Is it not obvious? To me, it just kind of seems like they think that she died from like alcohol poisoning or something. But why aren't they saying there's blood and stuff like that?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question I was thinking of too, because when we first talked about this, it was my understanding was that, yeah, like they couldn't get into the room. It was only the officers, once they came, that actually broke into the room because it was locked. And the police also said, afterwards, that it was one of the bloodiest scenes that they had ever seen. And there was also that thing of like, there was actually blood like on the foundation of the house or something, because it was so bloody. I don't even still know how that happened. So you would think, given that they would be freaking out, but there's no mention of blood or anything on that tape. So maybe, although they say, is she breathing? And they say no. So obviously they can see her.
Yeah, so they're not actually in the room.
So that's a little bit, yeah, I don't know. And I didn't hear anything. You don't hear anything in that call of the door, getting broken into or whatever. Because that was my understanding when, like I said, I thought the door was locked and then it took the officers breaking in. So maybe either that was like misinformation or they just said, no, she's not breathing, even though they couldn't see her physically. I don't really know. But so it's still kind of weird to me.
Yeah, like, I'm just confused at how many people were, like, in the house at the time. Like, alive. Because they're passing their phone around to, like, 4 different people. I'm just so confused as to, like...
Well, I think there was two surviving roommates, and then when we had talked about it before, I think it was they had invited other people over because they were concerned. Like, before they called 911, they had probably called a friend or something and said that the door was locked or they weren't answering or something like that. Maybe they were concerned. And this was a little bit of the missing piece too, initially, because we were like, why were they super concerned? Super concerned enough to call friends over and not call the police or something. But like, it was because what was revealed later that we talked about in the update episode before was the surviving roommate had actually seen a man in the house around the time of the murders. So remember, there was like that man with the ski mask on, or a mask, and had walked like towards her, past her while she was in the room, but didn't see her. And so putting that together, there was, and I'll get into a little bit more because there's actually some texts that have been released, some back and forth text messages between the two roommates that kind of fill in a little bit more of those blanks. But yeah, so obviously they see this man in the middle of the night after a sort of a commotion that they can hear, and then they are just in their rooms for a few more hours, and then must have called over friends in the morning to assess the situation, and then were probably told to call the police by one of the friends. And then there's also a neighbor you heard in that 911 call too, so the neighbor got involved because they were out in the driveway when they called. So she's probably frantically screaming. It's outside, the houses are really close, so the neighbors probably got involved, heard it, and they were involved. So that's where all the people came from, like probably the friends and then the neighbor. So there was quite a lot happening. Clearly there's a lot of commotion. So
they saw like the guy with the ski mask in their house, and they wait hours before they call the police. We may have talked about this before, but I don't know. I guess in the moment you don't want to be over dramatic, but I'd be flipping if I saw a masked man in my house. I'd probably call the police right away.
Yeah, and they make brief mention to it in that call too, that there was someone in the house last night, and the roommate, I think Dylan is her name, is the one who said it. She wanted to tell the dispatcher like the full situation because she's like, can I tell you what happened last night? And then the dispatcher was like, no, tell me what's happening right now. So she probably wanted to tell her the whole situation of like, we heard a commotion, there was this man that we don't know in our house, and now these 4 people are not responsive. So yeah.
But they don't know there's the 4 of them aren't responsive at the 911 call, right? It's just that one. And it also feels like it was just like a side note that, oh yeah, and by the way, we saw some guy in our house last night. It wasn't a like, you know what I mean? They're talking, they're like, oh yeah, and also there was some random guy in our house.
Yeah. So I guess I don't know, that would be enough to alert me that something was super wrong at the time when it happened, and then not calling. I sure wouldn't wait like 7 hours or something to call the police. But I also... Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. That was like my other reason why I was so confused was because they're only talking about this one 20-year-old that they can't seem to wake up, but where's the other 3? Like, they weren't worried about the other 3?
Well, no, you can hear the man in the background calling for Zaina and Ethan. So Zaina and Ethan were in the same room because they were dating. They were in the same room. And Zaina was the 20-year-old that they said, who was their friend. Ethan was just her boyfriend. And I don't know. So again, like, that's the thing. It's like, it doesn't fill in any of this, all of the blanks. So I don't know, because the other 2, Kaylee and Madison, were up on the 3rd floor. So Zaina and Ethan were on the 2nd floor, and then the roommates, I believe, or one of the roommates was on the 1st floor. So I don't really know if someone had gone up to the 3rd floor to see that they also weren't responsive, or their door was locked, or whatever the situation was up there. But there is no mention of them on the call. So I don't know, really. Like, again, we don't know, and that will come out during the trial because these surviving roommates are going to testify, or expected to testify at the trial. So that will be probably where we know like the full logistics of what happened. Like, when did they realize that the other 2 were upstairs not responsive? Because yeah, you're right, there's no mention of them in this call. It's really only Zaina and then Ethan as well. You hear the man call out for Ethan. So,
and then going back to what Katie said, like, it does sound like just a side note. Oh, by the way, like, we saw this person in our house last night. Like, you might want to know that. It's like, I don't know. I just feel like that's really just something weird that you wouldn't just nonchalantly just be like, oh yeah, by the way. I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like it's because they probably, like we were saying before, just think that this one friend is not responding because she drank too much. And they're not really, like, connecting that the other people are also not responding because they don't know that yet. And then having this guy in their house really would have nothing to do with her not responding because she drank too much. So it's probably just, like, a little bit chaotic and they're not, like, connecting all the dots. But yeah, I feel like if they did know that the other people weren't responding as well, there would be, like, a much more panic, and then the guy in the house would be probably, like, more important for that 911 call. But yeah, because it's probably just not, they don't know the whole story yet, so they're not connecting the dots, which makes sense, I guess.
Yeah, and I think it's clear from that call, it's just chaos everywhere. So, and clearly she obviously remembers seeing this man, but she didn't see anything violent happening in the moment. For all she knows, that's just someone that was in that, like, maybe because there was a lot of people in that house. Maybe this was someone who was hanging out with one of the girls or something. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. In the moment, obviously you're terrified. I don't know. We'll get all these details.
But he had a ski mask on, which is weird. Like, why go to a party and then have a ski mask on? But I don't know.
Yeah.
People are weird at parties.
Yeah, I don't know. It's weird. But also it wasn't a party because we know that, like, they had come home from parties because they were all sort of at separate parties. I think Zane and Ethan were at, like, a frat house party. And then the other two, Kaylee and Maddie, were at, like, some bar when then there was that surveillance footage where they were spying, like, from a food truck, and then they took an Uber home. So they all kind of, like, ended up at home, but they weren't all at the same party. So there wasn't, like, a party at the house, really. So maybe that would be weird for this random person to be there. But yeah, so, and the next thing I'm going to get into here is, like, the text messages that have been released to the public, or at least some of the text messages between these two surviving roommates. And again, it's not, like, revealing new details really, but it's just we get to see what the actual text messages were between these two. So as investigators piece together this timeline of that horrifying night, these newly revealed text message transcripts provide insight into the moments before and after the killings. So the messages are between the two surviving roommates, identified in court documents as Dylan Mortensen, so DM, and Bethany Funk, BF, and they show the fear and confusion that's happening in real time. So between 4:22 a.m. and 4:24 a.m., as the attacks were likely occurring, because this also lines up with the theory of when the murders happen. So Dylan sent Bethany a series of frantic messages. So no one is answering right now. I'm really confused. Or no one is answering. I'm really confused right now. And she also messaged Kaylee directly. So remember, Kaylee was one of the victims. She texts Kaylee and says, Kaylee, what is going on? And then her panic is escalating. She sends another text to Bethany. She says, I'm freaking out right now. Dylan then makes an observation. She saw someone in the house, and then she sends a text message, quote, there's someone in here, like a ski mask almost. And then Bethany's reply was dismissive at first, like STFU. So shut the fuck up. That's what that means. But Dylan insisted, I'm not kidding. I'm so freaked out. And then finally Bethany told her, come to my room, run. And then, but Dylan didn't run. Like, she didn't go to Bethany's room. Instead, she froze and she remained in her bedroom until the next morning when 911 was called. So obviously she was, again, that kind of goes to say that, yeah, she obviously was scared by this person because she was scared to even leave her room and kind of sat there in fear for several hours before calling. So that's kind of the text messages that are happening in real time as this is happening. And yeah, I mean, I feel so badly for these two roommates because I think initially there was a lot of confusion, or there was probably some speculation that, like, maybe the roommates were involved. Like, how are these two roommates surviving when the other four were killed? And people were like, it's crazy that you're not going to call 911 for hours. But I think you can hear the text. There's proof of the text messages between them, and obviously that frantic phone call. Like, so I also want to be careful not to, like, put any kind of blame onto them because they've kind of gone through it already and probably are facing a lot of scrutiny anyway. So I think no one really knows what they would do in that situation. So even if it doesn't seem like it's probably the ideal thing to do, obviously you'd want to call 911 right away, but they didn't. And honestly, if they did, it wouldn't have changed the outcome in this case. Like, by the time she saw this man in her house and knew something was wrong, the 4 victims were unfortunately already dead. So those were like 2 big revelations that have come out was this 911 call in full and these text messages. And so the rest of the updates that I have here are really about kind of the courtroom proceedings, or a little bit about like the DNA evidence and the big pieces of the case. So like I said, the trial of the accused killer, Bryan Kohberger, is approaching. It starts in August, and there's been a legal battle over crucial DNA evidence in this case. So if you remember from when we covered this case before, and we'll put a link to our original coverage of this case, the full episodes that we've done before, so you can go ahead and listen to those ones before and then come back to listen to these updates. But you'll remember that Bryan Kohberger was linked to the crime through DNA that was found on a knife sheath that was discovered next to one of the bodies. So that was a huge piece of evidence, was that police found this knife sheath right next to, I believe it was Madison Mogen's body. And so obviously that was a huge error by the killer, because that's a huge piece. And also, not only was it the knife sheath that could give a big clue, but also the DNA on this knife sheath. And then they were able to put together sort of this, using the genealogy technology to match this DNA. And that's kind of what led them to Bryan Kohberger's name. And then when they were kind of found out where Bryan Kohberger was staying, because he actually was arrested in Pennsylvania, because he had traveled, because remember, it was 6 weeks between the murders and when he was arrested. So in that 6-week time, he had left the area where the murders had happened, and he drove cross country to Pennsylvania, and he was staying at his parents' house. And so the FBI and the investigators actually were like, found out the house that he was staying at. They actually went through some of the trash from the family home. So after they disposed of trash, they took some of the DNA off those pieces of trash and connected it to the knife sheath. So that's really what was like the nail in the coffin for Bryan, and that's what led to his arrest eventually.
Why do we know why his DNA evidence, or why his DNA was in the system to start with? Because I mean, we always hear cases where they have DNA but doesn't match anybody. Like, how did they match it to him, and why was his DNA in there?
Well, I think it's because they did the genealogy thing, which is a different thing. Like they tied it to his father.
Right.
So like using that genealogy technology, you can like find out the DNA profile. So I don't think it requires your DNA to be in the database for that. I don't really know how that works.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, they found someone that was related to him, and then that makes sense.
And then they said that like the likelihood that the DNA isn't a match, like, because it was tied, and it said that it was pretty much linked to someone in Bryan Kohberger's family. But then when they traced Bryan Kohberger's phone movements and where he lived, like, that's how they found out it was him, not someone else in his family. And then they said the chances of it not being him or someone in this family was like 1 in 10 billion or something, or whatever the probability is. So that's how they were super confident. And that was just a number I pulled out of the air. It's not actually what the number was, but you know what I mean. Like, a really, really small chance that they had the wrong family or something, or that, it wasn't him. So that's what made them super confident that they had the right person. So obviously, like I said, they used the DNA on the knife sheath. They linked it to this they used genealogy to tie it to this family. And then they kind of saw surveillance footage from the area of the night of the murders and found this like Hyundai Elantra, I think it was, this white car. And then they found out that Bryan Kohberger also owned a white car, and that he lived a short driving distance away, because he was actually in Washington State at attending university, a PhD program. And it was like, even though it was a different state, it wasn't a long drive. And his phone had pinged in the area, and not only that night, but also several nights leading up to the murders, as if he was like planning it and like staking out the house and had driven that route many times. And his phone wasn't tracing at the time, because obviously it was probably turned off, so it wasn't exactly at the house at that time, but there was, they believe that it's probably because he turned it off so that it wouldn't be tracing him. But anyway, so that's kind of how it all led to Bryan. And actually, Katie, the question that you brought was about like the genealogy and like how did they know, but the legal proceedings right now, the defense, of course, is trying to argue that the DNA that they obtained from the trash specifically was obtained illegally and that it kind of violates Bryan Kohberger's Fourth Amendment rights because the Fourth Amendment talks about reasonable search and seizure, and they say that like the FBI didn't take in that Fourth Amendment into account when they collected these pieces of trash or whatever. So they're trying to really debunk that, or at least get it thrown out, because if they can prove that it was obtained illegally, then it wouldn't be admissible in court. So that's kind of the angle that the defense is pushing for. So, yeah, and also not only that, but actually, before I move on, so the defense moved to exclude this evidence, claiming that the search was unlawful. But then in just last month in February, there was a major win for the prosecution because a judge ruled that the DNA evidence would be admissible in court. So they threw out that motion. So that was obviously a big hit to the defense because they wanted to get that DNA completely removed. But it's going to be a part of the trial. They determined that it's legal. And so that's going to be a big part of the proceedings and major point in the trial. But now the defense is taking another approach. So they're also arguing that the DNA evidence was planted. And so the latest filing suggests that the knife sheath could have been deliberately placed at the scene to frame Bryan Kohberger, raising doubts about its legitimacy. So they're saying that, yeah, maybe the knife sheath had his DNA on it, but if it was taken from somewhere else and planted there, then that would explain why his DNA was on it, but that doesn't necessarily mean he did the murder. So that's kind of their angle that they're pushing for, and will probably be their argument in court. And so if they can convince the jury that this critical piece of evidence was manipulated somehow, then the state's case really could crumble, because it's going to be the focus of the state's case is this knife sheath, obviously, because it's going to come up, right, about how did you find the knife sheath? Where did you find it? How did you link it to Bryan? All this stuff, right? So the defense obviously is looking for any way to get that knife sheath evidence thrown out, or to at least, if they can't get it thrown out altogether, they're going to at least try to cast doubt on the legitimacy of it.
I guess that's like a good point. That is like circumstantial evidence, right? Like it is DNA, but it's still circumstantial DNA, right? It's like a weird one. And yeah, I can see how that maybe being like a good point, actually. Anyone could have put that there. The actual killer could have just picked that up from somewhere. Maybe not even to frame him, but just to like throw the police off. Like they just have this random, sheath that they put there. Yeah. It's kind of.
And where was the knife found again?
Well, it was found, like, I believe it was on the bed next to Madison Mogan's body. I think it was Madison. Yes.
Okay.
So, yeah. And we talked about this before when we covered the case originally, but Bryan was a PhD student studying criminology, and there was also records from his Reddit account, I believe it was Reddit or some online forum, where he had talked about, like, committing the perfect crime. So a lot of people thought that this was, like, his just sick way of, like, trying to commit the perfect crime and getting away with it. And I think part of the defense might be, because if the prosecution is kind of pushing that, I think they're going to push that, then the defense would say, well, if you're trying to commit the perfect crime, you're not going to leave a knife sheath behind. That's a pretty big mistake.
That's what I was just going to say that. Like, if he was studying to do the perfect crime, then obviously he didn't study very hard, because you don't leave the murder weapon beside the person you killed.
Yeah, and it wasn't the weapon itself. Like, the knife wasn't there. It was just the sheath of the knife. But yeah, a huge mistake to make for someone. So, I mean, everyone can make mistakes, so that doesn't mean maybe just fucked up, but yeah. So that's kind of the legal things that are happening in this case as we build up to this trial that starts in August.
And they never did find the knife, right?
I don't believe they did. No, I don't think they ever found the murder weapon. It was just this sheath. And also, I watched a lot of, like, Law and Crime or the Crime Network or stuff like that about this case, and they have a lot of like panelists on and stuff. So they're not people who are involved in the case. They're just people who might have opinions or legal experts. But it's also weird. I don't think yet that they found any actual DNA from Bryan other than the knife sheath. So I think that's going to be a big point of contention as well, because if the scene was as bloody as it was, how did somebody not get any of their own DNA on anywhere in this house except for the knife sheath? So there was also a suggestion that maybe he was wearing like those like suits that like painters wear to like they don't get. So, but then also because someone's like, but they never found that. They never found bloody clothes. They never found blood, I don't believe, in his car. I don't think there was ever blood evidence in his car. And if the scene was as bloody as the police were describing it as, saying it was like one of the worst, most bloody scenes, and you have 4 people that you stabbed, you're going to have blood everywhere. How did he not get any blood in his car? He went into his car right after the murders, allegedly, but didn't get any blood in the car? Or they never found any bloody clothes, like I said, nothing. So that's an interesting...
If he was
none of his
completely covered up... Oh, I was going to say, if he was completely covered up and had gloves, you could have taken that suit off and put it in like a plastic bag and then put that in the car and then chuck that somewhere. I mean, if he was studying how to do this, he probably knew that just make sure you get everything off before you get in the car kind of thing.
And like,
yeah.
And there was no DNA, his DNA on any of the bodies, right? Or any, like, mixed in with the blood or anything.
I don't believe so. That could be something that comes out in trial. Like, obviously they're not going to put out everything that they have, but I don't believe that's information that's been said that
because
they found
I feel like
his...
The
because I
victims
think...
would have, like, put up a fight.
Oh, go ahead.
You think, like, they would have defended themselves, so there would have been some type of, like...
Well, yeah, there's evidence that they did put up a little bit of a fight. But I guess I'll go into that a little bit later, too. But I think part of the defense's argument is that I don't think there was any evidence from Bryan other than this knife sheath, because part of their argument is if that was evidence was planted, they can't really refute that it's planted if his DNA is everywhere. If his DNA is all over the bodies, if his DNA is somewhere else in the house, that's not really an argument that anyone's going to believe that it was planted if it's that ingrained and everything else. So I think it's because it was like on this knife sheath and this knife sheath only is the point that they're trying to make. And kind of going to DNA evidence as well. So there was also actually 2 sets of unknown male DNA that is raising questions in the case as well. So there was a January hearing, so just this past January, Bryan Kohberger's defense team pressed lead detective Brett Payne about crucial DNA evidence found at the crime scene. So specifically, they focused on blood discovered on a handrail between the first and second floors of the house, DNA that was linked to an unidentified individual referred to as unknown male B. And then when questioned about why law enforcement didn't investigate this person further, Payne responded, quote, "We had already received Mr. Kohberger's name," end quote. So at that same hearing, the defense also brought up another key piece of evidence, blood on a pair of gloves that was found outside of the home, which was traced back to unknown male D. So Payne confirmed the presence of this DNA, but did not clarify whether law enforcement pursued its source. So according to the hearing transcript, it remains uncertain whether investigators followed up on identifying unknown male B or unknown male D at a later stage. Payne recalled discussions within the investigation team stating, quote, "So if memory serves, the discussion was we'll hold off. We'll stay with the one from the knife sheath. If we need to, we can address the unknown male B at a later time," end quote. So with these revelations, Kohberger's defense is expected to argue that the presence of multiple unidentified male DNA samples introduces reasonable doubt regarding his guilt. Legal analyst Maris suggests that this line of defense could play a significant role in the upcoming trial. So all that the part that I just read all about this DNA, that was actually taken directly from CNN, an article from CNN, because I wanted to make sure I got it exactly right, because it was a little bit confusing there. But yeah, so just wanted to source that. But yeah, so what do you guys think about these potential 2 other DNA profiles, or what do you make of them?
It's kind of like incredible though, that now that I'm like learning all of these new details, it's like maybe it wasn't the guy who they have. If none of his DNA was there and they have somebody else, or maybe all 3 of them, or maybe there's just 2 people. Like, it's really hard to like actually know who did it now. I feel like if this Bryan guy did it, like I feel like his DNA would be everywhere, but it's not. So it's like very, very compelling, and I think the defense has a really good argument when they come August.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of also just talked about why his DNA might not be everywhere. Like he could have worn something else and covered it up that way. But yeah.
But yeah, and also there's nobody else's DNA everywhere either, right? Like they found the DNA on the glove, but that DNA isn't everywhere. Like it's like no foreign DNA is everywhere. So obviously whoever did it covered their tracks really well. So you know what I mean? It's not just Bryan's DNA isn't everywhere. It's like nobody else's DNA is everywhere. So it's, yeah. And also, like Steph was saying, yeah, it is a good defense because I'm kind of having doubts now too that it was him or just him. And why wouldn't they like pursue this other DNA that's there? Like, why not run that through the genealogy? Or maybe they did, just didn't get a match and they're just going to like leave it. But I don't know. It just seems like they wouldn't. Why aren't they pursuing that as hard as they did the first one, like Bryan's? I don't know. It just seems kind of crazy.
I think the argument against to push back on that too, though, maybe is because they never really found any other evidence that led them to anyone else other than Bryan. Like, for example, they got the car evidence. Like, they saw the surveillance footage and then he owned a car that was like that. They tracked his cell phone activity and the fact that he was in the area or the vicinity of the house several times before the night of the murders and also potentially the night of the murders too. So I think probably because that was the first sort of information that led them towards Bryan, that they pursued that and it led to them having this.
But if they look at the other DNA, find out whose it is, they can track their movements as well and like see what they were doing and look at their like text messages and track their phone activity. Like they can't do that if they don't find out who it is, right? I think that they did all that for Bryan because they knew who they were looking for, right? That's why they know that about him, but they just don't even look to see who else is involved. They can't have that on somebody else because they're not looking for it because they don't know who it is.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and the fact that there is this other potential DNA is going to be obviously a part of the defense's case. So obviously we don't know the full scope of what the defense will be arguing. Obviously we know probably that the knife sheath was planted and this bloody glove kind of reminding me of the OJ case. There was this bloody glove outside the house and it had DNA from an unidentified person that's not Bryan. So that's interesting. But it didn't have, yeah, I don't know. It's weird. So there's going to be lots of compelling things that do come up. And there's also going to be other stuff that they probably just haven't released. So things that we don't know yet that are obviously going to come out. And this trial is going to probably take a long time. Months for sure. So I believe it starts August 11th and it's going to be going into the fall. So we'll be watching that one closely for sure. And the stakes are incredibly high in this case. So Kohberger is facing the death penalty if he's convicted. And in Idaho, it would be carried out potentially by a firing squad. So that would be how that happens. So also the defense is trying
I didn't even know that was a thing.
Apparently.
What the hell?
It seems crazy, right? Like this day and age, like that's how you'd execute somebody.
Well, you can, yeah. It's like out of a movie.
Yeah. So it's pretty crazy. So yeah. And the defense is arguing, or they're trying to get the death penalty off the table. And they're also pushing the fact that, or they're trying to argue that Bryan Kohberger has autism spectrum disorder. And therefore, because of that, the death penalty should be taken off the table. So they're not going to say that like he's innocent because of that or he didn't know what he was doing or whatever, but they're just trying to use that as an argument to get the death penalty taken away. So at least if he is convicted, it's not going to be the death penalty. So
has he been diagnosed with autism? Because I feel like that's just kind of like a he's autism, so like he couldn't like with the current doesn't make sense.
I don't know. I don't think he has an official diagnosis of that, but I think they're trying to say like certain like characteristics that he does and certain, just ways that he behaves kind of shows. I don't know the details that much of that, but just that they're trying to use that as a reason to argue against the death penalty. So yeah, although I think of course I'm not a legal expert. I think that the death penalty. I think having the death penalty on the table is actually better for your client if you're the defendant, because I think people are more hesitant on a jury to sentence someone to death, I think. So if it's going to be the death penalty, people might be more hesitant to convict. And therefore you may have a harder or easier time getting an acquittal if it's death penalty as the option. I don't know. That's just me, but yeah.
But there has to be an option of he's still guilty but no death penalty, or he's guilty with the death penalty, right? Because I think we saw that in another case where they made the mistake of it's either death penalty or innocent. I forget what case that was, but if they just make sure they don't do that this time, he could still be guilty, just not have the death penalty, right?
Yeah, I think it was Casey Anthony. I think. Maybe.
Oh, okay, yeah, it might have been. That's why she got off, because it was like, well, we don't want to put her to death, so she's innocent.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, so we don't really know if that's actually going to happen, like if they're going to take the death penalty off the table or not. But that's what the prosecution is pushing for. They're pushing for death penalty. And they feel obviously very confident in their case, but it's going to be interesting to see how these arguments from the defense, how they turn out. So
I'm interested to see what their case is, because right now I have reasonable doubt that maybe it was him. So I'm like interested to see what other stuff they just haven't put forward yet.
I think in my opinion, it's almost irrefutable that he was there. I think just because he goes for drives in the area. His car is spotted in the area the night of the murders, around the time of the murders. His cell phone was conveniently turned off in like the 2-hour time span. To me, I think it's obvious, but yeah, all you have to do is reasonable
I know
doubt.
it's still circumstantial though. I don't know if it's enough to convince people for the death penalty, for sure. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm convinced really, completely.
Yeah,
I thought I was convinced, but I don't know. Not after this. I'm going to go back to those roommates who didn't call 911 in the beginning. Suspicious. Just kidding.
No, I don't think they're suspicious.
They're not.
No, I'm
just
just
blame
kidding.
on them.
I'm not gonna
No.
blame on them. I was just.
I mean, you can hear the 911 call and also the text between them when the moment it's happening. Like clearly they weren't involved in it at all. Yeah, I don't know. And like I said, though, even if they did call 911 immediately, it wouldn't have changed. Like it wouldn't have saved their lives of the 4 victims, unfortunately, because the deed had already been done by the time. He had already killed, allegedly, these 4 people, or someone had already killed these 4 people. But yeah, so there's probably still lots that's going to come out in this case that we don't know about. I'm interested also to see what witnesses the prosecution calls. Probably it'll be the roommates, the 2 surviving roommates. It'll probably be like character witnesses for the victims, potentially, and anyone who knows. Or maybe that would be for the defense, I guess. But yeah, I'm interested to know, because also there was also talk about they didn't know how there was a connection between Bryan Kohberger and these people. Like, did he know them? Was there any connection that said that he knew them before? But if you follow his cell phone activity and his car activity, like he had kind of targeted this house for a while leading up to it. Like it kind of seems that way anyway, based on the evidence they gathered, that he had been like in the area of the house several times before, kind of staking it out. I don't know. But yeah, so super interesting developments here. And like I said, just a little thing at the end here. So obviously, like, I feel really bad for the victims' families as well, because they're watching this just like everyone else. They don't, I'm assuming, don't know much more than what gets released, because they're not getting told things either. And like Kaylee Gonzalez's father was talking about how, like, there's evidence to show that Kaylee was awakened and tried to get out of the situation, and she was trapped. Just the way that the room was set up, the way that the bed was set up, she tried to fight it, but there was just no escape, really. She was trapped and couldn't easily get away. So yeah, he believes Kaylee had no way to escape. And it's just really, really sad seeing, because he did an interview with 48 Hours, I think it was last year, and it's just really sad to hear them talk about the victims, and they really can't get closure until this whole thing is over. So this trial is going to be very, very hard for them. So I feel bad for them, but hopefully it can come out with the right verdict. But I don't know. If Bryan Kohberger is acquitted and you believe that he didn't do it, well, then there is no justice, because then the person who did do it, or the people who did do it, are getting off scot-free. So unless they charge somebody else, like if he gets acquitted, are they going to open up the investigation again to look for a new person? I don't know. So, yeah. And so, yeah, as the trial looms, the world is really waiting for this the next chapter of this, in this chilling case. Like, will the DNA evidence hold up in court? Will the defense's claims of planted evidence sway the jury? And most importantly, will justice be served for Madison, Kaylee, Zaina, and Ethan? Is the question. So we will, of course, be watching the trial closely, and we will be providing updates along the way as well, because we'll keep you informed as we know more. So that's what we're standing. And this, at the time of this recording, those are the most recent developments, and we're recording this in March. So there could be other stuff that comes out before the trial as well, but the bulk of it will have to wait for the trial that starts in August. So that does it for this episode of the show. As always, you can follow us on all the social medias, Crime Family Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. We're on TikTok, Crime Family Podcast. And you can email us, crimefamilypodcast@gmail.com. Send us your case suggestions, your feedback for the show, or just tell us how much you like the show or whatever you like. Leave us a review as well. Go to your podcast app and leave us a review and a rating. That really helps the show out a lot. And yeah, we'll be back next week with a brand new episode. So thank you so much. And until next time, take care. Bye.
Bye.